I had fun with this coffee shop kind of deal today. Did you guys? Yes. This was fun. We always do something a little different every week. It's just exciting. You never know what's coming. You always know there's coffee, though. That's exciting. Thank you, Brian, for that coffee every week. We're a community of people. We're seeking to be an authentic expression of the kingdom of heaven. And that's not always easy, is it? Because authentic kind of looks messy, doesn't it? If you want to be true and honest and real, you have to be willing to be a little sticky. It gets a little sticky. It gets a little messy. It gets a little chaotic. We're going to look at a word today that I just find really fascinating. Before that, though, let me recap. We're going through words. We understand words are deep. They have layers. And for the Hebrews, one word meant 100 different word pictures. So it's so important to take that picture and unwrap it. And what we're doing is we're unwrapping these words and allowing ourselves to see them fully and then apply them to today. So last week we talked about, what word was it? What word was it? Shalom. Shalom. Peace, right? Nothing missing, nothing broken. We understood last week that to experience peace, there's a word always associated with peace. Every time it shows up, the word is contentment. And so we understand in order to get to peace, we have to learn how to be content, as Paul says, in all things. And once we get that, we begin to experience these beautiful layers of peace. And so we talked about this inverse idea. To experience peace at home, we must first experience peace outside, in our community, our neighbors, our co-workers. The one that keeps taking your red stapler. And we have to first learn to have peace there. And then once we get peace there, we go home and we share that with our friends and our family, the people closest to us. And when that begins to happen, we begin to have shalom, nothing missing, nothing broken there at home and at church community. We have this beautiful awareness that we are in the presence of the divine. God has been with us and we are partaking in a beautiful dance. And it's so fabulous when God gives us that awareness. Today, I'm going to teach you how to fight. I'm going to teach you how to fight. Growing up, my dad was not like a big guy. I heard all my friends talk about their dads, and their dads were pretty big. They were tough dads. They were like manly dads. Craig, you're a manly dad. You're a manly dad. And my dad, though, he was more of just kind of like happy-go-lucky. Everyone just be happy and love each other. And just, that was my dad. But my dad never taught me how to fight. And so I remember the other kids, they'd be like, hey, Tony, my dad, he's like a teal belt. Is that like, how many steps above black is that? Oh, it's like 100. Oh. Yeah, he showed me a move. It's like, and you're dead. Really? Yeah, I can't show anybody because, I could go to prison. Your dad showed you that? Yeah. Your dad's the coolest. And so I remember hearing them talk about how they would learn to, if I had to punch someone, I'd do this. And I'm thinking, oh, my dad never taught me that. But one day I remember at school, I was very young. And this bully just kept coming at me. And I remember the first time I thought, I'm going to hit him. So I remember, I'd never hit anyone before. I have no idea what it looks like. So I remember like clenching my fist a little bit. And the guy's just yelling at me. And I remember I hit him and it was the most awkward hit you could ever do. I didn't hit him like this. I was like, oh! The guy was probably thrown off more than anything by my loose knuckle, whatever. I'm knocking on his head. Take that. Anybody home? Oh. So I remember I hit this dude. And what happens when you hit someone? Well, the movies tell us that everyone erupts with a, yeah, he did it. And you become a hero and they lift you up and the bad guy's sitting there, bleeding. But I didn't realize bleeding, like that comes with fighting. And I don't like blood. So after I door knocked him, he fell to the ground. And I remember seeing blood. And I thought, oh, well, I didn't sign up for that. Oh. And then he just looks at me like, what did you do? And all of a sudden, before you know it, I'm crying. That doesn't happen in the movies. supposed to like flaunt around and be like, yeah, what's up? North side? Whatever, I don't know. No idea. And so I'm crying. I can't believe I did this. And I walked away. I actually ran away. Ended up in the principal's office. I had no idea what to do. And I vowed that day, I was like, I will never hit someone again. I don't ever want to do that. But the problem was, no one taught me how to be in conflict. And so I stopped using violence, but I picked up other unhealthy ways of dealing with conflict. And they followed me my whole life. This word, Yisrael, Israel, it means to wrestle, to be in conflict. And so to be an Israelite is to be in conflict, to wrestle. And who do you wrestle with? Well, let's see. They wrestled with their neighbors, they wrestled with themselves, and they wrestled with God. And so deep within the understanding of what it means to be an Israelite, what it means to be human, is this idea that we wrestle. We're in conflict. We struggle. And that's what it means to be human. So many times in our lives, we try to avoid conflict at all costs. But the reality is, you and I are human. And we wrestle. And we struggle through things. And it's only after we struggle that we find we are given new names. Only through the struggle do we find growth. And so all throughout Scripture, you have these people. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, you have Cain, you have Abel, you have Adam, Eve, you have all these individuals who struggle with each other, with community. They struggle with God. There's the story of Jacob in Genesis. And Jacob, if you follow this right, he's around 70 years old. How many of you have ever wrestled a 70-year-old and won? Well, that would be weird. And if you admit that, you're just a weirdo. I totally took him down. Yeah. 70. And so we're told here Jacob is left alone. He's left alone. And he wrestles with God until daybreak. And it seems that it takes all night for God to finally strong-arm Jacob, right? And it's so weird to me that it would take all night and then God is like, okay, now I'm putting my super suit back on and I'm just going to touch you. And now your hip is broken, right? It's such a weird story. How do we read this? So odd. For the Hebrews, they understood the story in a really powerful way. And let me share this with you. There's this word for wrestling. It means to be, actually, this word means alone. Look back at the verse. Then Jacob was left alone. That word, badad, it means to be separated. What happens when I sin? I'll tell you what doesn't happen. God isn't up there with some magical book writing down yay or nay and wiping out your name. That's symbolic language. Here's what happens. When you break shalom, when you begin to cause things to be missing and broken, you begin to separate yourself from community, from family. You begin to pull away from seeing God's divine presence all around you. You experience separation. And that's what Jacob is experiencing. He's experiencing separation. He's left alone. And so we read on in Genesis. We're told that he touches the socket of his thigh, and the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him. The word wrestle here I find really interesting because we're looking at words. The word is avec. Avec. And this word, it's not a G, it's actually a Q. Spell check. Did me wrong again. Need a Hebraic spell check. Avec. Dusty, to get dusty. So think about this. You were made from dust. Your very name reminds you that you struggle. You get dusty. You wrestle. And so here's the beauty of this. Jacob is wrestling with himself. He's wrestling with some things. And it's dusty. It's dirty. It's kind of rough. Because that's the human experience, to wrestle. When you start to put all of these concepts together, all these words in the Hebrew, and you retranslate this is what it looks like. It looks like this, and it makes a whole lot more sense. Jacob wrestled with himself in the presence of God. Ah. How many of us have wrestled with certain things in our lives? We've wrestled with inner issues. We've wrestled with coworkers. We wrestle with a mom or a dad who don't want to let go. You're the mom or the dad and you don't want to let go. Whatever it is, you struggle, you wrestle. All within God's divine presence. He's there. He's never left you. Surely he was there and I wasn't even aware of it, Jacob says. We wrestle. Now, I've seen people wrestle in really destructive ways. Our nation is filled with history of good and bad wrestling, isn't it? We have wars, we have rumors of wars. Our families, our lives are filled with good wrestling, but then really destructive wrestling. And so the question, of course, is how do we learn how to wrestle with ourselves, with community, and with God in constructive ways? How do we learn to be in conflict? Because to be human is to be a wrestler. That's the human experience. If you want growth, you must wrestle. So how do we learn to wrestle? I want to share with you 5 different ideas. And if you have your sermon notes, get ready to write. Here we go. Number 1, this is a very Hebraic concept, and I just want to share it with you. Number 1, here we go. We re-evaluate our story. Consider this. The Israelites, they are marched 100 miles plus on feet to a new place. They lost everything. And this is the question they're asking. They're not asking this. How do we historically make an accurate account of what happened to us? That's not what they were doing. They weren't writing a history book. You don't write a history book when you're losing. You write the American history book that you pass out to the children after you've won. You guys get that? Now, here's what they're doing. They're saying, how did we get in this place that we are currently in? What cycles keep happening that cause us to go back into exile? Those are the questions they're asking. Here's the reality. Some of us, we keep going back to the same conflict over and over and over again. Some of us, this issue, this problem, this wrestling match, it follows us. Why? Why does it keep following us? Why is it that when someone brings up a certain presidential candidate that looks like a Cheeto, do you lose it? Or the other opposite side, and you bring her name up and you just absolutely just become unglued to people. You bring up a certain word or whatever and you just lose it. Why do these conflicts follow you? Where did they start? For the Israelites, they said, we want to figure out the source of this. We want to learn why we keep falling into this pain and brokenness over and over again. And this is why James in chapter 4, he says this. What is the source of quarrels and conflicts among you? What if, when you were facing conflict with someone else, you stopped and you asked this question? What is the source of this? Why am I here again? Is it them, or is it my own story that's getting in the way? What if we were intentionally asking ourselves that question? Number 2, step 2, seek to hear and then be heard. How many of you in conflict, when someone frustrated you, you're the first to be like, blah, 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 and you unleash. You have an opportunity to talk and you just, and before you know it, you've just given them the whole experience of why you dislike them, blah, 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 and you've gone 20 years past. It's ugly. Here's what the Hebrews do. When someone was in conflict, when there was an issue, when someone lost a family member, whatever it was, when they were struggling, they would do this. They would go to that person's home. They would dress in sackcloth. They would put ash on their foreheads, other places, and they would sit Shiva with them. And this is what this word means. It means to sit in solidarity. And so this is what you would do. You would sit with them and you would say nothing. How many of you get frustrated when someone comes to you, you're in deep pain, you're frustrated about something, and they have all the answers? Oh, well, I would do this. Well, you know what your problem is? You want to wring their neck. They're your friend, but you're like, don't get any closer. I'll knock you. Because they're failing to listen. And that's the beauty of learning to sit Shiva was this. You would listen, you would share in the experience, and then, only then, could you be invited in sharing after they give their narrative. What if you took time during the conflict to listen more and talk less? Listen more and talk less. Number 3, it looked like this. Simple speech. For the Hebrews, they did not use words just offhandedly. Words were very important to them. And so when you were in dialogue with someone, when there was conflict with someone, you didn't just throw them extravagantly around. Again, I can think of so many times in my life when I've been in conflict with someone, and I want to let them know they're wrong, right? They're wrong, of course, which means you're right. So you're in conflict with them, and so all of a sudden you begin to talk about this thing that happened 10 years ago. And then this other thing that happened 8 years ago. And before you know it, you've dredged up so much history that it's no longer about that thing anymore that you're currently in conflict with. Now you've just given them just a plethora of stuff. This is vomit. And what are they going to do with it? Well, like anybody, they'll go like this. It stinks, man. No thanks. And they will get on the defensive. And before you know it, you don't have a conversation anymore. You have a sparring match where one person wants to be on top, the other is down here, and who can push the other person, and who's going to be right, who's going to be wrong. That never ends well, does it? Look at some of these verses. Proverbs. The soothing tongue is a tree of life, but a perverse tongue crushes the spirit. Think through that one. Your words in conflict can bring life, or they can bring death to relationship. What if you stopped to consider your language for a minute? What if we stopped using you, them, and we use inclusive words like we? What if we began to consider our words a little more carefully during conflict, when we are wrestling? Look at this one in Ephesians. Don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building up others. Think about this. In conflict, when we're wrestling, what if I stopped and said, I want only words that are going to build this person up? What would your wrestling matches, your conflicts look like with people? You're no longer worried about getting your way, making them believe what you believe. You're more interested now in repairing relationship. So beautiful. Let me give you the next. Step into their story. I think Jesus understood this the best. He said there in Matthew, he gives this brilliant parable, right? And he begins to share a metaphor afterwards. He says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, what do? You say, no thanks, I'm not even a marathon runner. What do? You go 2. Now, I used to read this as like, Jesus is calling us to all be doormats. Give them all this, give them that, and be a doormat to people. But that's not what he's saying here. What Jesus is saying here is this. When you have solidarity with someone, when you walk with them, when you consider their story, where they've been, then you can find restoration in the discussion. But if you only consider it from your perspective, is this conversation going to bring any kind of repair? It's not. It's going to bring brokenness, more brokenness. You are going to undo the very thing God is trying to do in that relationship. Have solidarity. What if you consider that person's story, where they've been, who they are, what they've been through, before you cast judgment and attempt to make them more like you? And number 5, seek a solution. Philippians has a beautiful picture of what seeking a solution looks like. Paul is trying to bring together the Gentiles and the Jews, 2 groups who don't get along, 2 groups that are in total conflict. And he says, consider Christ. Look at this. who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped. Have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ. Oh, we got to keep going, buddy. There we go. ADD's kicking him. But emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant and being made in the likeness of man. Being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death. This is what it means to find solution. When you find solution, you actually become humble. When's the last time you were in a disagreement with someone and you humbled yourself? You cared more about the restoration of the relationship, and that allowed you to humble yourself. If you don't allow yourselves to humble, if we don't allow ourselves to humble ourselves in conflict and wrestling, we'll never reach restoration. Jesus gives us the most beautiful picture of what it looks like to find restoration. And so, when we begin to wrestle, and when we begin to put these things to practice, and by the way, are these things easy? There's a reason why some of you are looking at me like, it's so much. This is really complicated. This is really difficult. It's not easy. It's actually very simple, but it's not easy. But once we learn to put these things to practice in conflict, in community, this is what happens. I go to work. Next slide. And I find that all those people that annoy me so badly at work, when I begin to put some of these things to practice, I actually begin to show up to work happy. Weird. I'm doing TPS reports and smiling. What's that, sir? You want another one? I'm dealing with a certain person who drives me absolutely batty in a different way, and now we've become friends. Or at least people who can stand each other. We found restoration. We found repair. And once that happens, when I come home, I can begin to exemplify that with my family. I'm no longer angry and bringing around all that baggage. I actually begin to share it with family. And when I come to church, guess what I'm talking about? I'm talking about the moments of hope and repair and restoration I experience all week long. And when we share our stories, we see the presence of God. We see the presence of God. We become aware of the dance. Let me end with this. I'm learning to skateboard. I have a skateboarding partner. She's kind of my coach. And lately she's been waking me up at about 6:15 every other day. She's awesome. And we go to the skate park. And she's very good. Here's a picture of her. She's dropping into the pool. And this pool, you can't really tell, but this is very high. This is about 5.5, 6 feet. And so most of us, we have trouble jumping into a pool sometimes with water. Imagine now you've got a board with wheels on it. And and that's her. She does it without any help now. She does it all by herself. She's learning how to turn and all jump and all these ollies. It's awesome. And then there's me. And that's the kiddie pool. And last week, I'm working on the kiddie pool. And I'm like trying to drop in. And I keep falling over and over again. Some unwholesome language is coming out of my mouth periodically. And I'm throwing my board, and then I look at my skating guru, and I shouldn't have done that. And I'm getting more and more frustrated, and I took a couple spills that I have to tell you, at 36, when you land on your backside, you're feeling that thing for like weeks. And you just bruise so much easier. And so finally I'm like, I'm so mad, I can't do this thing, I can't do the kiddie pool. And so I finally just stop and I sit down. And I'm sitting there watching her and all these other child prodigies who they can balance on anything. So frustrating. And I'm sitting there and I look over and there's this short Asian man. And he's off to the right. And you know what he's doing? He's doing this. At me. And I'm like, dude, why are you smiling? That was rough. My booty is, that was hard. Why are you laughing at me? And he's just, and so I'm sitting there, and I'm frustrated. I feel a little bit hurt by this, that he's smiling and laughing at me. And the funny thing was, I began to picture myself in the kiddie pool. And I thought, that is kind of funny looking, isn't it? All those pads, funny looking red helmet. I probably look a little bit silly, didn't I? It's probably fun to watch me. And so I'm sitting there and I start giggling and I look and I laugh and kind of smile. And he walked over to me. And I'm thinking, is he going to rub it in now? Like, what's he going to do here? And the beauty of this is, when this experience happened, I have to tell you, it caused me to say, I have to do a sermon on this. It's funny how these things come up. Because he sat next to me and he said, hi. And that was it. I was like, hey, awkward. I said, did you enjoy watching that? He goes, yes. I said, oh, that's good. Good. He said, do you see that boy out there? I said, yeah. Okay, sure. The one doing all the crazy stuff. Yeah, he's 11. It's my grandson. I said, oh. He said, I love watching him fall. What kind of like demented old man are you? What is your deal, man? And I started laughing. He goes, no, I hope you understand. I love watching my grandson struggle because he never gives up. And he struggles through it. And almost every day I get to see him, and I am inspired at my age to struggle. I am inspired watching my grandson. And I realize I'm no longer talking to a grandfather. I am talking to the divine. Jacob wrestled. He wrestled. And after he wrestled and struggled, he realized God was closer than the air he breathed. When you wrestled with that coworker, seeking to find peace and restoration, God was smiling, watching his children struggle through it. When you and your wife had that conversation again, and things got heated, and you both started to cry, and you both started to work through that thing again, God was holding you close and saying, oh, it's so beautiful. When church communities struggle and they wrestle together, God is present, dancing with his people. My prayer for this community is we become the kind of people who learn not to run from struggle, not to run from the wrestle, but we jump right in. But we don't jump in with weapons of mass destruction. You know what we jump in with? Our hearts wide open, showing love and mercy and humility, showing the character of God. And when that happens, we get a beautiful glimpse of the kingdom of heaven in our midst. That is my prayer for us today.